Hello and welcome to this session of the Mayor of Casterbridge. In the last segment, we discussed the role of Michael Henchard for his own downfall and his own tragedy. In this presentation, I will discuss the role of chance, accident, and coincidences in Hardy's novel, especially this novel, The Mayor of Casterbridge. This role of chance, coincidence, this has always been almost a perennial topic when we read Thomas Hardy, because Thomas Hardy was an author who really believed in his life that our life is manipulated by chances and coincidences, and which eventually lead to our final destiny, our fate. And there is very little that man can actually do to better his life or better his fortune. In this book, in this story, The Mayor of Casterbridge, we shall find out how these chances and coincidences are playing a very vital role in not just Henchard's life, but in the life of other characters, and how these events, unanticipated events, are shaping the story. The vital role of chance and coincidence. Thomas Hardy always believed that life is caused by fate. There are things man cannot control, and therefore, by and large, man's life is melancholy or sad. This philosophy is reflected in all novels of Hardy. The mayor's life is too full of chances, unexpected events that are beyond anybody's control. We all experience the same, but Hardy's stories are chiefly dominated by unanticipated events. This is so special about Hardy. When we read our other writers, other stories, we perhaps do not come across so much of dominance or predominance or over-dominance of this factor of life, that is chances and coincidences, accidents which occur without any notice. But when it comes to Thomas Hardy, we must always remember that this is one technical instrument Hardy knowingly or unknowingly used, and of course used very successfully, because all the novels are the success or the popularity of most of his novels really owes to this instrument. What is the instrument? The instrument is the play of the role of chance, coincidence, and unanticipated events. Now, the first such incident is Susan's return. Susan is lost wife of Michael Henchard, and she makes a sudden appearance. Susan's return to Henchard's life is not just unexpected, but almost absurd. But it happens and coincides with Henchard's plan to marry Lucetta. When Henchard is well settled in life, he is over 40, and he is a very successful businessman. He perhaps is still willing to marry Lucetta. At that time, Susan, the lost wife, makes her reappearance with the child. The child is no more a child. Elizabeth Jane is her name, and she is now over 18 years of age. In fact, Henchard is in dilemma, therefore, and decides to prioritize Susan. Now, when Susan arrives, Michael Henchard drops the plan of marrying Lucetta, and he prefers his lost wife, Susan. In fact, Henchard's life takes a total change, of course, by this singular event. In reality, however, such accidents are quite rare. Yes, it is true that when it is a story, it's really fun reading such a story. After two first chapters, we see Susan is walking the same road which she walked years ago. She is now being accompanied by her grown-up daughter, but this time she is looking for her lost husband, Michael Henchard. This hardly happens in reality. It hardly happens that one spouse detached comes after, like a ghost, like an apparition, after so many years looking for the spouse. But in Hardy's story, this is the most crucial event, and this is unexpected. Perhaps Susan herself couldn't think of such an event. Michael Henchard is absolutely dumbfounded. He doesn't know how to. But yes, of course, it's a great joy for Michael Henchard when he sees Susan back at Casterbridge. Even the apparent joy of having wife and daughter together is dashed to pieces when Susan soon passes away and Elizabeth turns out to be Newsom's daughter. Another jolt to Michael Henchard, that even Susan doesn't live a long life. After having come to Michael Henchard, she merely spends some time and then she passes away. And eventually for Hardy, this is a jolt because Hardy remarried his wife. He thought of resettling his household once again at a mature age, but even that hope so sadly is dashed to specks. And after that event, Michael Henchard also comes to know that this grown-up lady, that is Elizabeth Jane, is not his real daughter. She is biologically somebody else's. She is the daughter of the supposed drowned man Newsom. So this is a coincidence, but this coincidence is really difficult to believe, because in reality such events hardly happen. Henchard's discovery that Elizabeth Jane is not his daughter. Again, Henchard finds Susan's letter exactly then when he has just told her that he is the real father, and this accident is purely because of a half-sealed letter. And the letter, which was left by Susan for Henchard, was supposed to be opened only after the wedding of Elizabeth Jane. But just because the envelope was not properly sealed, Henchard felt curious and he took out the letter and read it. And there couldn't have been a greater surprise for Michael Henchard than to discover that Elizabeth Jane is not his real daughter. Henchard's long-cherished craving for child's love and affection is destroyed. Such events are another example of absurdity and therefore unbelievable, but very successful to weave a plot. For the sake of a plot, it is really wonderful. If the letter were properly glued, Henchard could have lived a happy life, at least till the marriage of Elizabeth. That's right. I mean, once he discovers that Elizabeth Jane is not his biological daughter, his entire approach to Elizabeth suddenly changes. And it is another great shock to Elizabeth Jane. Elizabeth Jane is a poor victim, even I think a greater victim than Michael Henchard in this story. So one after another, she is taken aback, she is taken by surprise, and every surprise is worse than the before. So after the death of Susan, Elizabeth Jane perhaps thought that she could live a happier life. But when she found that Michael Henchard's entire approach is changed, of course she couldn't take it very in a warm way. Elizabeth's and Farfrae's chance meeting with Lucetta. Now, these two female characters, Lucetta and Elizabeth Jane, meet each other in a graveyard, and that too by a chance. Elizabeth chance meets Lucetta in a graveyard, and Farfrae accidentally meets Lucetta in her house, only giving birth to more complications in the plot. Lucetta and Farfrae both fall for each other. Farfrae distances himself from Elizabeth, but these meetings are just coincidental. Here, these coincidences completely change everybody's life in the story. Now, when Lucetta and Elizabeth Jane meet, they meet quite by an accident. Similarly, Farfrae comes to Lucetta's lodging to look for Elizabeth Jane, but he ends up meeting a stranger, that is Lucetta, and soon they fall for each other. Soon they start liking each other, and that is a different course that they take, especially Farfrae in the story, and of course Lucetta. For both of them, it's a new course. Lucetta starts planning to drop Michael Henchard, and Farfrae Elizabeth Jane, and eventually they get married, but their married life is also very short-lived. All these things are pure products of chances and coincidences, because after all, you cannot meet every person in your life just by chance. Now, perhaps the greatest shock and the most surprising event in the story, in the entire story, is the reappearance of the Formative woman. The Formative Woman is the same woman who was selling alcohol and other beverages at a camp when Michael Henchard was young and he was looking for a job. He was at a village and he was being accompanied by Susan and young Elizabeth. But this Formative Woman later on makes a reappearance in the story, and it is not a good news for Michael Henchard. Perhaps the most unanticipated event in the story is the reappearance of the Formative Woman on a trial for creating nuisance. Henchard happens to be one jury member, and the woman immediately identifies him as a criminal who sold her wife years ago. Henchard cannot deny. This dramatic turn of things entirely ruins Henchard's reputation. Lucetta starts having her second thoughts on her marriage. In real life, however, chances of such kind are extremely rare. Again, chances of such things are extremely rare. This Formative Woman, where from has she come? Why has she come? And why did she have to appear before Michael Henchard when Michael Henchard is a jury member? Michael Henchard at the beginning, couldn't recognize this woman. But strangely, this woman could very much and with great conviction recognize Michael Henchard. And that was not the end of it. She opened the Pandora's box. She disclosed everything. Not everything, but at least a most crucial event in Henchard's life that took place years ago. And that is the sale of his wife. She tells the packed court that Michael Henchard, though is a jury member, but is guilty of having done such a grave and unnatural crime. The crime is selling his wife. And Michael Henchard, with all his greatness and magnanimity, cannot deny this event. He gracefully accepts it, and he immediately, when the story spreads like a wildfire in the entire Casterbridge, Michael Henchard immediately sinks in prestige in the eyes of every other person in the town. But the very event itself, seems to be quite a manufactured one by the author, because it is not the natural flow of events. All of a sudden this woman appears, maybe for the sake of sacrifice, for surprise, and for the sake of the plot and the story, a sensational story. And that is how you build the sensational stories, by unexpected things. The Formative Woman comes, she makes a discovery, she declares the discovery, and Michael Henchard also accepts it. Michael Henchard could have easily denied this charge, but he didn't do that. So this surprise, further on, little by little, brings far more tragic things and catastrophes, just one after another, upon Michael Henchard. The fluctuations in weather. The weather god does not seem to be pleased with Henchard. On the day of national rejoicing, sudden rains spoil Henchard's arrangements, but Farfrae is spared, and when, in anticipation of bad weather, Henchard buys in large stocks of wheat, he finds weather's improvement, and he sells his stocks with loss, and when it further deteriorates, he does not have anything to sell. In this event, Farfrae, however, pockets a huge profit. Such gambling on weather proves costly even for a seasoned man like Henchard. Now, we have seen on couple of occasions when there was a day celebrated at Casterbridge. It was a day of national rejoicing. Michael Henchard put up some kind of a show, but it was all marred by a bad weather and sudden rain. Farfrae at the same time put up some kind of tent and shelter. People took refuge in the shelter, and Henchard became a victim of the sudden weather change. But the greatest change in weather, which ruined Michael Henchard perpetually, is when he believed a weatherman who forecast that weather would deteriorate. It did, but not at first. First, weather improved, and all the grains which Michael Henchard bought in had to be sold out at a cheaper rate, and then weather again improved and prices fell. But at that time, Michael Henchard didn't have anything to sell. But in this entire process, Farfrae was was the gainer. He pocketed a great profit, and one man's meat is another man's poison. One man's loss is another man's gain. Michael Henchard lost his good proportion of his stock and his profit, and it became the real gain for Farfrae. So this, even for a man like Michael Henchard, a seasoned man in this business, had to fall victim to this unexpected weather changes. Death of Lucetta. Even after having got back the love letters, Lucetta dies unexpectedly just because of this Skimity ride. Such rides were not entirely uncommon in Dorset country, but certainly rare, and moreover, such ride could have potential to take somebody's life. Poor Lucetta expired suddenly, leaving a void in Farfrae, because both of them were quite newly married. This is another dramatic turn in the story, bringing Farfrae and Elizabeth back to each other. Lucetta's death was absolutely shocking and most sudden, because a Skimity ride which was arranged to disgrace Michael Henchard and Lucetta proved fatal, and perhaps the people who organized such a show could not believe in this fact that it could have the potential to take somebody's life. But Lucetta was so shocked that she succumbed to this event. So the newly married Farfrae lost his wife, and it also gave an opportunity to Farfrae to come back to Elizabeth Jane once again, which Elizabeth Jane perhaps couldn't expect, and both of them started courting each other and became man and wife once again. So Lucetta's death was unexpected in this story, and that too almost accidentally. Not almost, but entirely it was an accident, because she had no signs of whatsoever to fall a victim to such kind of a Skimity ride. Newson's return. The next event is Newson's return, the sailor, supposed drowned sailor. Another unforeseen occurrence in the return of the sailor Newson, who was thought to be drowned, which was not right. If he was not thought to be dead, Susan would not have come to Casterbridge, and the entire story could have been different. Newson's arrival is as strange as the arrival of Susan and the Farmity woman. Poor Newson returns empty-handed. The poor fellow Newson, his drowning is an event which triggers the entire story of the Mayor of Casterbridge. It was a rumor, it was a fake news, or it was some kind of an illusion of his death, of his drowning. But Susan was convinced, and that is the reason which prompted her to migrate to Casterbridge. This fellow was not dead, it was only a rumor. And at the end of the novel, he makes a sudden reappearance from nowhere, only to find that his wife is dead. And he was also told a lie by Michael Henchard that his own daughter, Elizabeth Jane, is also dead, which was not true. Later on, Newson finds. And eventually, Newson, of course, can meet his own daughter Elizabeth, and he is eventually a happy man, unlike Michael Henchard. But Newson's reappearance in this story is as surprising as the reappearance of the Farmity woman, or perhaps Susan, because nobody, including the readers, could anticipate such a reappearance of this man. He comes back just like a ghost, but he is not as wretched, as ill-struck as Michael Henchard, because after all, he finds his lost daughter. Hardy's overuse of chance and coincidence. Thomas Hardy is sometimes accused of his overuse of chance and coincidence, almost mechanically. Though melancholy is the chief strain of his philosophy, but one cannot overlook his exaggerated dependence upon this dramatic device. After all, we hardly experience so many coincidences in one life, and those too all to the disadvantages of a character. It has often been said that Thomas Hardy depended upon this instrument quite heavily, because in real life we certainly do not experience so many chances and coincidences. And in each story of Thomas Hardy, whatever accident takes place, they all take place for the worse. They all take place for causing the sufferings of the protagonist or the important characters. In this book, in this story, all the coincidences prove fatal, prove disastrous to Michael Henchett, except for perhaps the reappearance of Susan. He finds his lost wife Susan, but that happiness is also very short-lived. So, but yes, Hardy's popularity also chiefly lies with this fact that his books, his stories are full of surprises. Without surprises, you cannot draw the readership. It is one of the instruments that authors use, and use sometimes very successfully. Otherwise, you cannot make your stories very popular. So, despite all charges, generations of readers have accepted these accidents and coincidences in the novels of Thomas Hardy, and they are really good, but of course they always carry a pessimistic angle with them. So that's it, and that is the end. You must tell me how you have found this presentation. You can text me, you can call me, you can send me a message, video message or audio message. I need your feedback very badly. Yes, of course. And so let us meet in our next presentation in a couple of days' time. Thank you.